rather than just the slides and me projecting everything onto you guys. So today I wanted to talk about over engineering and sort of the pitfalls and how to avoid them. While a technical concept, I suppose, this presentation is very much focused from the product's perspective, so hopefully that is of value. So as any good product management presentation begins, we're going to start with a bit of a story. So about a month ago, I went to a conference here in the Bay Area, and after checking in, was given the stereotypical bag of goodies, T-shirt, sweatshirt, water bottle, luminescent name tag, the works, and sort of afterward just put it aside, went home. And that weekend, hadn't really thought anything about it, and then was going for a hike with my girlfriend, and she went into sort of our cabinet, grabbed water bottles to take with us, and grabbed the water bottle that I had brought home with us that I had brought home from the presentation, or from the conference. And it sort of stopped us in our tracks. And this is the one. It's called the Auto Slow Kangaroo by a company called Contigo. They make all kinds of water bottles. But the thing that just sort of stopped myself and my girlfriend in our tracks is that this was the most complex water bottle we had ever encountered. As you can see here, here's your product description, right? It's got all of the highlights, all the features, all the things that this water bottle does. But the one thing that, and it does talk about in this product description, right? Like it says, the big mouth, wide opening, easily fits, right? All this sort of fun stuff. But one of the things that it really feels like they forgot here is sort of the core premise of what a water bottle does, right? Now, I actually physically brought the water bottle with me, but if you look at if you look up there, right, like you're not really sure where the water you drink from this thing, right? It's kind of there, but it's not, and I'm not really sure how to use this water bottle. And so the number one thing, understanding that complexity is then, actually when you try to use it, you get hit in the face with this fun little thing, right? And the whole point here really is that while you have a great idea, right? You have a water bottle that does more than just serve water. It sort of misses the bare minimum requirement of what you're trying to do. And that's sort of the whole concept of over-engineering in a nutshell, right? Is you wind up having way more features, way more stuff, for lack of a better word, than you need to actually hit the purpose of your product. And so I don't know if any of you have ever seen this diagram before, but it is, I'll give you sort of a minute to digest it. But it's the idea that while you'll see at the top says if Apple is democracy, I'll come back to that in a second, but what's going on here is sort of, again, the democratization of if the iPhone did everything that you could possibly want it to do, right? You look at this thing, it's got a gajillion ports, right? And don't try to read everything, even though it is pretty funny. But the idea here is that you have this very robust device that doesn't actually that doesn't look like it does any particular one thing well, and it's got a million different unintuitive ways to interact with it. And so what this really comes down to is what you have is sort of an example of two things here. One is you have a product that's been designed by committee, where you're having clearly multiple, not just stakeholders, but points of input from users, user types, different people who are probably using this, right? You can say pretty conclusively that somebody who needs this device to switch between Android and iOS, for example, probably not the same person who needs perhaps a ViewMaster VR slot, or perhaps needs a retractable antenna. So there's a lot going on here that perhaps is coming from conflicting users. The other part that we can see here is that we're failing to understand our users and what they really need from this product, right? So if you think about the products that you use in your life every single day that you rely upon, the most valuable ones for you probably serve one, if at most two purposes, right? They're very focused, and while they may have robust feature sets behind them, they serve a very specific goal. And so from my experience in the way that I work with the teams the team that I work with at NPR, we really focus on four main things to sort of avoid the pitfalls of over-engineering. And so I wanted to share this with you. So the first thing that we really do is focus on product market fit. So is everyone familiar with this term, or is there anyone that's not familiar with this term? To be honest, it's okay. So the idea here, and this quote from Mark Andreessen, who, if you haven't read any of his stuff, it's fantastically interesting as a product person. The idea that product market fit means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. The point here is that there's focus, right? You're not going after more than one market. You're not going after a market with multiple complexities. You're really focusing on what exactly it is that market needs and how your product achieves that purpose. And one of the pieces here that is incredibly important is constantly to be assessing and reassessing the decisions and questions that are being asked about your product and the market that it's in, right? The idea there is that the more that you focus on assessing and reassessing not just the market, but your product in that market, you're far more likely to continue to maintain product market fit once you've achieved it, and far less likely to have a product that falls out of product market fit and ultimately becomes less used by your users, and then you fall out of, you're no longer a relevant product. The other piece here, which is incredibly important, is the idea of making data-driven decisions. And one of the reasons that this is so important is because data is often the most powerful tool as a product manager that you'll have in your arsenal. You've probably heard that before if you've ever been to one of these, but the idea is that data is and should be incredibly important in every process that you're undertaking. And the idea there, and I've always loved this quote by Jim Barksdale, is if we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. Right? The idea here is that opinions are, as we all know, everyone is entitled to one. That doesn't mean that they're always right. And data, on the other hand, while it can be construed, and I'll sort of come back to that in a second, is the most objective measure that you can have when you're making decisions. And it's incredibly important to rely on that, which helps you avoid sort of the many pitfalls that come when you're just making opinions based on your decision, or perhaps you as a user. And so one of the things to that end about focusing on data and using it is as a product manager, the important thing is to remember that you are not the user, right? And even if you are, that's not the way the hat that you're putting on in your organization or hopefully. You're supposed to be sort of the internal master of your users, right? You're the internal user expert. And so the idea there is that while you may be a user of your product, you don't want to be making the decisions based on the way you use the product. You have to establish the ability to sort of take that step back and remove yourself so that you're able to inform your decisions from a data-driven perspective. And the other aspect of that is really the way that you utilize that data. So as I alluded to before, while you can sort of manipulate data to prove any point, the most important thing that I think product managers do is take data and figure out and identify hidden trends that are there, or things that other people don't see, and then figure out how to act upon those, or take it to the team to then figure out how to act upon. There's a great quote which I think has been or misattributed to Albert Einstein like a bajillion times, but it's like, 90% of your time should be spent, or 95% of your time, again, I don't know the exact quote, but should be attributed to or spent trying to define a problem, and then 5% actually solving the problem. And the idea there is that allowing for data to help you figure out what the problems are you're trying to solve, you're far less likely to overdevelop something or build something that doesn't actually fit for your market. So the other part here that is core to the way that my team and I really avoid over-engineering is utilizing personas. So is everyone familiar with personas and their use? Okay, great. And so the idea here, and this is tied very tightly to the previous slide, is that personas will allow you to actually take all of that data and have a conversation with people in a way that it makes the it makes the data very relatable and understandable to people who may be 2 or 3 steps removed from that data, or even people who are super close to the data but don't necessarily know how to digest it appropriately. And so, what is incredibly powerful about the use of personas is the ability to take both stakeholders and developers, or your development team more broadly, and align them behind specific things. So, for example, at NPR, one of is anyone here familiar with NPR One? Keep using it. One of the big things that we do when we are developing for NPR One is define very specific personas for who we're developing for. And it helps us. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that we always get from users, both in places like the App Store, but when we do user interviews and hear from them anecdotally, is that the app doesn't let users read in the app, or it doesn't allow them to create playlists. And the whole idea of what NPR One is, if we were to go down that road, we could very easily deliver those experiences. But the idea of what we do with NPR One, and for those who aren't familiar with NPR One, it's essentially public radio personalized via, it used to be just apps, but now we're in cars, we're on Xbox, we'll be hopefully someday on a refrigerator, who knows. But the idea there is that you don't, in the same way that when you listen to terrestrial broadcast radio, you don't have to sit there and curate your music or curate your content, much like you would in most music apps these days. It's done for you. And so that is a core value proposition of the app, or the experience in general, is that we want you to be able to relinquish control and just let us take care of it for you. And so if we gave users the ability to have playlists, or if we allowed for the ability for them to go in and read, even though that one's less relevant, but there are different pathways that come off of those that very much stray, or very quickly stray, from the core value proposition that we set out to achieve with that. With that platform. And the idea there, again, is not the fact that in many ways, that platform is off base. It's the fact that we spent a ton of time just figuring out if there was actual value there for end users based on that sort of relinquished control. And so, back to where that relates to all of the actual utilization of personas, is as a team, it's, as our feature sets and our roadmap prioritization is going on, it's very easy for people to come into the room and are saying, I talked to my mom this weekend and she loves the app, but it just doesn't do this one thing, right? And if it did that one thing, she'd use it all the time, right? We get a lot of those kind of feedback, or that type of feedback. And then conversely, we will look at data, or we'll look at something else and see other trends that also need to be taken care of. And so from the persona perspective, it allows us to sort of remove any either personalized bias or just or actually purely anecdotal data to help us actually make informed decisions. And so, for example, what we will actually do is, as users, as we are thinking about problem statements and defining our roadmap, we will actually craft the problem statements through the eyes specifically of a persona. And so what this really allows us, or forces us to do, is deprioritize the features that wouldn't be valuable to a persona, or it allows us to really focus on the problem statements at hand and define features around that rather than just what a user is asking. And the fourth thing that we are laser focused on is getting rid of features that we don't need anymore. One of the biggest things that I did when I joined NPR was to reevaluate much of our digital portfolio. And one of the things that was there is an app that called the NPR Music app. And at its peak, it was our second largest platform. It was really great at the time it came out, which was long before I was at NPR. It was loved by the music, or the community that was using it, but it was built in an era when apps specifically didn't really have focus. There was no strategic vision around them. They just were sort of the native app rendering of your website. And we never really went anywhere with it. And one of the hardest things that we were trying to figure out to do going forward was, okay, our music division wanted to pivot and focus more on music news, as in addition to sort of the new music that they were introducing. But we also wanted to figure out how to bring NPR or music stations, music content into NPR One. And we suddenly realized we had this conflict of, well, we have an app that's still heavily used by a significant portion of our audience, but it's completely in the way of everything we would be accomplishing with these other personas that we've identified for our existing products. And so for us, it became a very quick decision, or it wasn't a quick, it was a quick decision, but a long process to actually enforce that decision, to actually retire that app. And even though it had and still continues to have some usage, we've managed to migrate much of that audience over to NPR One, to other areas. Specifically, for example, our mobile website, which is exponentially more performant than that app that was built 5-6 years ago. And so the point there is that what it allowed us to do is make a difficult decision to retire a product, or in this case, get rid of an entire product line. But we've treated features the same way, and what it allows us to do is continue to grow and focus on our existing platforms and grow those user bases and make an even greater investment in sort of the product market fit of those platforms. And so really, what you get with sort of going, I think I'm not slides. Yeah, I'm not slides. Yeah, the slide link, I'm saying that. But the big piece here, which is really where this all sort of comes back together for us, is that what allows for an organization of NPR size, where we have, and this is sort of a little bit of the color that I didn't provide earlier, where we have about 270 member stations who are all considered stakeholders in every one of our processes, in conjunction with sort of the internal headquarters, mothership, NPR itself, it allows the focus that we have on these 4 categories really lets us prioritize not just roadmap, but feature development, the direction that we take, while our digital products is applicable here as well, but also this is bleeding very quickly into the way that we handle our broadcast content. And so we're actually, if any of you follow NPR at all, we about 6 months to a year ago launched something called Story Lab, which essentially invites anybody from both the public media space, but also just people like us, in to try and create new content. And the idea there was that we had launched or sort of acquired some fantastic new programming about 1.5 years ago, and wanted to figure out ways, based on personas, that we could create that process internally. And so this entire new division that exists at our company, Story Lab, now exists based on the use of essentially personas and that focus on data. So that's actually the end of my presentation. I did that way faster than I expected. But that gives more time for questions. And as I open this up to questions, please feel free to pepper me with questions that are not related to this super focused topic. I'm happy to talk about product experience that I've had in both working in digital media specifically, but I've also had experience in the e-commerce world. So I have hopefully a lot to offer. So thanks. Do you want to get back now?
So we're going to do some questions. So feel free to ask some questions and try to get as much as you can.
Sure.
It's not clear to me why you deprecated the music thing, other than it was just based on value.
Yeah, sure. So the question, in case you didn't hear it, is there was confusion around why we chose to deprecate the music app, other than sort of legacy technology. So the decision there was basically, there were sort of 3 facets that played into the decision. One was very much a business decision of resourcing. We have X number of initiatives we want to undertake, X number of prioritizations. Which one of these things is the top? And one of the things that we've really struggled with prior to, I would say, about 1 year ago, was understanding what products to undertake versus what projects to sort of to allow fall by the wayside. And we very quickly realized that even though the music app in that category, or from that facet, was great at its heyday, we just didn't have the resources to support it. And so that was the sort of the business decision side of it. The user experience side of it was, we knew what we wanted to, we knew that we had a persona that fit very nicely within 2 other existing product lines that we had, specifically NPR One, but also the NPR Music mobile website, which is website in general. And so we knew that we could sort of scratch the itches that the music app was achieving for users other ways. And so sort of rather than focusing on having an app that sort of did all these things, we thought, how might we solve this with the existing sort of tech stack that we already have? And then sort of the third and much less important bucket was, while important though, was sort of lack of strategic vision around it. So again, as I alluded to earlier, when our music app was built, it was just sort of the catch-all. It was a Swiss Army knife sort of our music content. And really now, if you look at sort of the apps specifically in that space today that are excelling and exceeding expectations, are apps that are super focused around with a very tight strategic vision. And the fact that the app is about, again, 6 or 7 years, I guess it's about 7 years old, we were extremely limited about what we would have done with it. So we would have had to essentially rewrite the entire code base and all that sort of fun stuff. And so we decided to sort of take a step back and think about how might we strategically approach this with fresh eyes, and realize the first part of that was retiring the existing app. So.
Quick follow-up: when you said support, was that a technical support or was it content?
In terms of,
you said you didn't have the resources to support it.
Yeah, purely technical. So if you work in an organization and anybody ever asks you how much does it cost for me to build an app, I always round up and say it's going to cost you $200,000 to build the app and $50,000 a year to maintain it. And that number is probably very wrong, but it gives people at least some baseline metric to understand what they're investing themselves in. Because normally what happens in those capacities is most people think about the initial upfront investment, but fail to account for the annual accrual of what this means sort of for the longevity of that product's life. So to that end, no one really accounted for that $50,000 a year for the last 4 or 5 years of the product's existence, and as a result, we had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of technical debt behind it. So it's a very business way of looking at it.
And that maintenance was like just keeping up with the iOS or the Android releases.
So the main maintenance issue is essentially every year when Apple comes out with a new version of iOS, there's changes. But probably significantly more importantly is the actual technology year over year evolves. So, for example, this is very in the weeds, but like the APIs that we were using in that app are long since deprecated. So they're not even supported anymore, and many of the systems, or I should say third parties that we were working with, don't support the version of the technology that was in that app. And so, we had, because it wasn't maintained on a regular basis, we would then have to upgrade all of those and so on and so forth. And so it's sort of just the ongoing burden of maintaining, a native app in that capacity. That's the problem.
Question?
Yeah.
So, a lot of people talk about the challenges of creating an app, but what are things we don't think about when you take down an app?
The challenges of taking down is getting people to stop using the thing. It's actually really like a big problem. So we retired, even before we retired the music app, we had a little used app. Is anybody familiar with Planet Money? It's a podcast. It's really interesting. But long story short about it is, many years ago, someone thought it was a great idea to create a Planet Money app. And literally the only thing that this app does is it has just the feed of episodes from a single podcast. It does one thing and one thing only, and it doesn't even do it very well. And so it had like a few thousand people using the app. And so what we decided was, before we would retire that app as sort of a test playground or sandbox to try out retiring an app before we moved on to the music app. And what we quickly discovered was we could remove all of the features. We could make it so the app didn't work, but people would still open that app just to see it. Like, you can't force someone to delete an app. So that is probably the number one problem, is once you, or from our perspective, is like every time the user opens that thing, it still hits an endpoint in our system. And so if you're at scale, if you're at a large enough scale, you have a real problem. And it's sort of indicative of a larger problem, which is when you're releasing products in general, you always have to consider legacy support for those. So every time we make, whether it's a major change or even minor ones, we're always considering, if we release this today, how do we support it 2 years from now? Because the reality is while probably most people in this room probably update their devices semi-regularly, hopefully keep up with the regular, like the newest operating systems, there are a lot of people that don't do that. And Steve, one of them. There's always one in the crowd. And so to that end, every time we release something, we have to consider those people who aren't upgrading their phones. So our legacy builds, the things we released 2 years ago, are still being used by even a small percentage of our audience. Is still a significant number. So accounting for those sort of things is very much a major work and not something that we take into account pretty much every week. So, yeah.
You said the product curates the playlist for the customers. How do you discover the needs or a personality or the personalization of the product by talking to customers or by doing surveys, or how do you discover the very personal needs of the actual customer, his preferences?
Yeah. So when we're doing feature development,
yeah, when you design the curated list for his view, how do you figure out like this is what that the customer is liking? Or
yeah, no, good question. So I'll approach this specifically from like our product perspective. So the way that NPR One works, which is I'm assuming what you're asking about, essentially what it does is we capture ratings based on the way you interact with or listen to content. So, for example, if someone listens to a piece of content the full way through, we take that as a high level of affinity for that piece of content. And then we have other sort of mile markers where we say, depending on how a user interacts with that piece of content, how we should rate it for them. And then based on that, we have a team of data scientists that essentially create and then update an algorithm that, depending on what we're focusing on at any given time, tweak that algorithm so that it actually gives users different content. However, there's also an editorial side of this, which is sort of the core premise when we launched NPR One about 3 years ago, was sort of the marriage of data and analytics and our editorial departments. And so what we basically have is a system where our editors, or we have a team of editors, I think we're about 5 or 6 now, that all they literally do is decide what goes into and what you hear because you already heard something else. So, and there is an algorithm behind that, but it's really not just human curation or data science or data in general. It's the marriage of the two that really does it. So,
can you give us an example where you over-engineered and NPR did something?
I was hoping someone was going to ask that question. Yeah. So where do we begin? So we have our current and main flagship app is the NPR News app. It's on iOS, Android. Does anybody have it? No, that makes this even easier. So it has essentially 4 main functions. You can listen to live radio, so you can queue up KQED or any other station if you want from anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. We provide a list of headlines, so you can have of stories that you can read. So we present sort of like the top 20 at any given time. We also present that in a topic view. We also present that in a locale view. And then we also present everything on a program basis. And so if you open up the app, you can see Morning Edition and All Things Considered, which are sort of the flagship, the sort of what we call the tent poles of NPR. And then we also have everything from Invisibilia, which is a podcast that came out a couple of years ago. It's been very successful, and all the way down to World Cafe, which is also a large production, but is just produced on the East Coast. So all this is to say that the app serves many purposes, but it doesn't actually do one of them very well. And the other thing it does to that end is it has a playlist functionality, which is why back to our request from a lot of our NPR One users is this concept from the playlist, because what we offered in one app, why don't we offer it in the other? And so what we have, and actually one of the efforts that I've been leading over the last about 6 months, is really figuring out that audience. Because what we have, or a problem we have as a result of it, is we do have a large enough user base of that app that we have a very bifurcated audience. So we have a lot of people using this app for very different things. Right? We have people that are primarily using it just to stream their local station. We have people that are using it to stream their station, but a station that's on the other side of the country. We have people that are using it only to read. We have people that are using it to only listen to podcasts. So from a product perspective, while the app works, it's not particularly successful in any one of those areas. While we're always one of the top rated apps in the App Store, which is awesome. It makes it really hard to prioritize feature development and figure out where we go with our roadmap, because we have so many different users that we have to meet that if we're here today, our potential is here if we actually focus on one or two of those personas. So the short answer to your question is our current use app is a great example of sort of feature bloat and over engineering. Yeah. No problem. Other questions?
That is a great example, and I do have a news app. The persona piece was interesting to me. You talked about, because I have exactly that challenge when I look through it. I'm trying to figure out which person is this aimed at. Yeah. And I guess the question I have around the persona approach, though, is how do you refresh them? How do you keep those personas relevant?
Yeah, great question. In case I didn't hear it, the question is, when you have personas, how do you sort of keep them relevant, refresh them? And the answer is get out of the office. You make sure that you are constantly talking to your audience, your user base, and understanding them from both an analytical side, which I think is the easier side. It's a skill that once you learn how to use Google Analytics or any of these other tools that are out there, that it's very easy to understand from an analytical and sort of dry perspective who your audience is. But the harder and much more time-intensive part is actually sitting down with people and asking them why they're using your app or they're using your product in a specific way. And so in a very tangible example here, every week I talk to at least 4 or 5 people who use the app, and sometimes it's in a very unofficial capacity. I have done more user interviews at a bar than I care to a call. They're not always the clearest, but they work out. And so you sort of, as you're doing those, you notice trends, and very much the idea there is you marry what you see in analytics, and as you see trends changing in your analytics, using those user interviews to sort of understand how and why those changes are happening, and then the actual sort of tangible manifestation of all that work is usually in persona is just a document. So I will say one of the really interesting things that at a previous job that we did with personas was we actually got printouts or sort of the big head cutouts. Like you see it in the old music stores of like movie characters. And we had these personas that just sat next to our developers. And so, the amount of times where I would watch somebody like sort of pick their head up with a question, look at the cardboard cutout and be like, and then go back down. And then it was numerous, because it's very helpful when you have sort of that physical embodiment of what it is you're doing. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, so first off, I'm a big fan of NPR. I listen to NPR radio in my car every single day. My question is, I just Googled, NPR has been like a traditional company, a network of, or organization rather, network of various different public stations all over the world, all over the country. So how easy is it for a traditional organization to embrace this digital revolution with apps and podcasts? How easy is it to convince the management that we invest in the digital revolution?
It's a great question. It's not easy, is the short answer. The longer answer is these things take time, especially when you're an organization that's been around for 40 years. And one of the biggest things, or I guess I would say one of the biggest hurdles that we are always working to try and overcome is we have markets that are entrenched and have been there for long before NPR existed as an organization, before sort of public radio was a thing. But we also have, because we are such a large organization with again like 270 odd member stations, we have very different needs for each one of those. So for example, WNYC and KQED here in San Francisco are 2 very large entities that have digital presences all on their own, completely separate of NPR itself. Same with WBEZ, which is in Chicago. they're three of our largest, if not our largest stations in the country. Meanwhile, so their needs are sort of one thing, and meanwhile we have much smaller stations in places in sort of the Pacific Northwest, especially when you get into sort of Middle America, where their only digital footprint are the products that we create. And so you have sort of very conflicting needs there. And so we literally, about a year ago, brought on a chief digital officer to basically answer that or address that exact problem. And he's been fantastic. And a lot of what he does is and he actually came to NPR from one of the stations. And so his entire mantra is basically figuring out how do we resolve that friction and make it so that the collaborativeness, or I should say that the tension that exists becomes collaborative, or a collaborative effort. And so it is definitely something that, while I wish I could tell you exactly how we do it, we're constantly learning. But I will say that one of the main tenets of what we do on a day-to-day basis, we have entire teams that just work on that thing. It's actually just one team who really focuses on sort of tying in sort of the digital and traditional broadcast world together to figure out what the world going forward is, right? And so as a product person, as a product manager, it's your job to understand, what's not just around the corner, but 2 corners ahead. And so a lot of times, stakeholder management is a lot of what I do as a result. So.
How do you prioritize features for a given product?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, how do I prioritize features for a given product? It really depends, honestly, on a lot of things. Specifically, so for example, one of the things that's really interesting or really unique to NPR is we have a sponsorship model instead of an ad model. And what that basically means, while it is in some ways just a technicality, we don't actually sell ad space on any of our products. From a programmatic perspective of like just putting sort of like an adhesion unit somewhere and just letting it sell. So we actually have to hand curate all of our sponsorship material. And so where this ties into prioritization is at many organizations, or sorry, I should say this, well, that's one side of it, NPR needs to make money to exist. And so we have a very untraditional model where typically you'll see money usually always wins out through events. Right? Like if you have a sales team that comes up and says, we're going to make $1 million if you give us X, or if you prioritize Y, you're typically going to get an executive that says, give me Y. And for us, so I'm very fortunate to work in an organization where that's not the case. But we do get pressure from that part of the organization. So we do account for sort of those, like the revenue side of it, but what really focuses around us is sort of less of the, is really focusing on sort of like, what do we see as the greatest need for in our, again, this is probably unique to NPR, what is the greatest need in digital media, specifically on an audio perspective. So we always prioritize the audio experience, but also try to do it in a way that's very user-centric. And we have struggled in the past with sort of with this sort of dichotomy of meeting needs of our member stations while also keeping a laser focus on the end user and prioritizing stuff around them. And so this is something that Amazon has done. Like that's their entire portfolio is built upon, is this idea of user-centric, and everything comes back to the end user. And we've really tried to sort of evangelize that internally and build upon that on our own perspective. But while that is the primary way we prioritize things and think about how does the end user benefit from this, and that's a drastic oversimplification of what that process looks like. But it 10 times out of 10 yields the results that we need. So we have. That answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
How much time and how much value do you place on reviews in the apps?
How much time and how much value do you place on in the App Store? Probably more than I should. I got in trouble with my mom at Thanksgiving because I was reading App Store reviews at the family table, and that didn't go for long. The actual answer is there are, over the years, tools have emerged that let you sort of track the trends. One of the really valuable things that comes out of this is it's very raw and unfiltered, right? So you really, in many ways, if you think about sort of the level of friction that a user has to go to leave a review, especially if it's a negative one, they have to really be pissed off at you. And so they have to really, first they're encountering a problem, then they're sort of articulating their thoughts in their mind for a second, then they're leaving the app, then they're going to the app store, they're finding your app on the app store, and then they're leaving a review. And so that's a lot of hurdles to overcome. And so while we certainly focus on the pats on the back, or not the pats on the back, the pieces of feedback that come in that are saying, we love the product and we would love it more if we did X, and sort of getting to the meat of those comments, we spend even more time sort of focusing on the detractors, because it's understanding those where we most often catch not just our product failures, but a lot of times where our app may be crashing or we may be having technical problems on the app. And so back to the sort of beginning of my point was, it's become exponentially easier over the last few years to do that in a much more sort of spontaneous nature than it was a few years ago. So there are many services out there that essentially scrape App Store reviews, and so you can sort of go in there and then parse out those reviews into whatever information that you want and then act on it in that way. But with that all said, seldom, if ever, do we look at those reviews and then make a decision based on the reviews. It's typically we look at those and are then intrigued to ask why. And so we try to get a hold of those users and have conversations with them and understand what's sort of really at the core of the problem that they're encountering. And then that really helps us understand what we're not doing well, as well as what we're doing well.
So in terms of latency, I'm guessing you have audiences around the US. Is it around the world or just US?
It's the world. I mean, our something like 98% of our audience is in the US, but we have a lot of expats.
Okay. So how do you deal with latency to make sure that the content is close to your audience? So if I'm trying to stream an audio or podcast to make sure that I get in the right time.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way we handle latency is we work with a CDN, content distribution network. So you could, if you are interested in that topic, I would highly recommend. There are some really great, even just YouTube videos out there where you can learn about sort of how CDNs work. But it's even Wikipedia in this instance is actually pretty good.
So when I CDN, you own your own data center or use AWS to make sure that I have presence around?
Yeah, we were actually in the process of switching, but we're moving to AWS. So.
How do you track retention, customer retention? I mean, how do you track on a daily basis?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We actually don't track on a daily basis. We have the metric if we want it, but for us, daily look at as active users. So daily active users is really not a good barometer for us for pretty much one reason and one reason only, is that the news cycle can completely change how people interact with, or how many people are listening or interacting with our content on a given day. So the highest amount of, so this is an example, the highest amount of traffic we've ever had across all of our digital platforms was the day after the election, a few months ago. Meanwhile, if you look at 2 days before that, so 2 days before the election, our traffic was well below normal. And that's also because sort of the election cycle had set off our daily numbers in a crazy way. And so the only way to normalize those numbers is to look at things on a 30-day period. And so what I think you'll notice in sort of the industry, especially in digital media, was very quickly becoming sort of a standard, or the standard bearer is 30-day actives. So we look at basically on those 30-day increments how we're performing. So, and it proves to be, I think, significantly more valuable than understanding, if you think about it, and sort of take a step back from your own shoes, right? Like how you're using apps or whatever it is on a day-to-day basis. can completely fluctuate depending on your routine. So.
Is that your main metric, 30-day average user retention, or are there other things that you focus on?
Yeah, so we have several main metrics that we use, and it sort of varies depending on our platform. So while our 30-day actives is one of sort of the benchmark that we apply across all of our products to get some level of comparativeness. If NPR One uses both monthly active users, but also focuses a lot on essentially session duration, so how long you're using it. Whereas NPR.org, we get a lot of our traffic is driven through social, so the amount of time you're spending with us is much lower than if you were firing up an app on your phone. And so the core metrics there really vary depending on what it is we're trying to look at. So the sort of framing of what problem we're trying to solve really changes what metric we consider key. And so as we sort of evolve down that path, we'll typically identify different metrics that are at the very least accurate for us to be able to gauge decision point.
Do you have a pretty consistent deployment or feature rollout cycle, or is there some other factor that's driving that?
Yeah, no, good question. We work in 2-week sprints, so we release every other Tuesday. So with the exception of like some major projects where every once in a while we'll sort of like shy away from that, but we're constantly experimenting. So we've done some of the design sprints that I don't know if you're familiar with them from Google, but that's where they originated. But we've sort of experimented with a few of those on some products and projects. And we always learn. Sort of the beauty of product development is like it's never stale.
Oh yeah, so depending on your product, so there's multiple different products, right? There's the mobile product, there's also the radio product, and so on. So how exactly do you get feedback? I mean, how exactly do you get feedback for each one, and how do they all like interrelate? So like say I listen to NPR on my phone, but then I also listen to it in my, in my car. So how exactly does that matter?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and yes, it matters a lot. So one of the things that's actually become sort of a pet project of mine at NPR is how do we figure out who you as a user are on broadcast? Because essentially, for the last 40 years, or really shorter than that, but starting I think sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, the way that they started capturing listening march, just sort of mind share on radio is they would give sort of, there's X amount of thousands of people in the country, they would give sort of these like pager-like devices, and you just wear them to like the old school beepers on your hip, and every time you're sort of around broadcast signals, there's just a ping sent out, I think every 30 seconds or a minute, and that's still how we count listenership on broadcast, which is just bananas, because it's 2017, and how do you still ask people to carry a pager around? And so that's the one way it's done, and that's sort of how like the industry standard is set. But as all good like sort of product managers in the digital space are asking, like, how can we do this a lot better? And so we at the moment don't have a way of sort of creating like an end-to-end understanding of the user and all of the various ways that they're interacting with NPR content. But we're extremely focused, especially this year, on sort of raising, getting things so that they're at a place where we can get there. So NPR One is a great example where we, for the first time, introduced logging and forced logging for people to utilize the app, which had and continues to receive a bit of controversy because it's public media content, and why should it be behind any type of roadblock or wall? And there's valid arguments behind that, but for us, the idea here is we want to actually be able to, for the first time, be able to say, like, this is the content that's most valuable to you as an audience, and have an understanding of that. And so that married with the idea of, as a user, or having your experience and interactions with NPR travel with you across all of your devices, across wherever you're listening to it, is something that we're very interested in solving, figuring out how we can do that. And so the one sentence answer to your question is right now we're really trying to figure out sort of even just from a technical perspective, how can we do that? But long term, that's something we're extremely invested in solving today. So literally by the end of the year, we will have sort of gone from where we are today, which is just NPR One, gives us an insight to, I think, 2, if not 3 of our other platforms will also be able to deliver that information.
In terms of introducing new content and prioritizing your resource, who are the stakeholders and what's the process like? Then decide, right, let's go for this one and invest more.
Yeah, great. So we used to have a pitch process where every 2 weeks, or basically whenever you want to, you could go forth in front of the leadership of our digital media team and pitch an effort. And it still exists, but we've done it a lot less because a lot of great ideas came out of it, and we're executing against those. But primarily the way that we do it is we have some well-established, our teams are established around product lines. And then from there, we sort of, product managers prioritize, and then we bring it to our leadership who meets weekly to sort of prioritize resourcing around the things that we're prioritizing. And so one of the things that I love the most at my job is that I have near complete autonomy over my product lines, which is like a product manager's dream. And so if I deem something to be the number one priority for my product line, my boss may completely disagree with me, and my director may completely disagree with me. And at the end of the day, if they want to, they can overrule me. But I have never been overruled in that capacity, and they will guide me to what they think is a better decision. But I've never been told, here's your initiative for Q4. See you in 12 weeks. So that is to say, back to the original question, that we have a very sort of, I guess I would say, ground up approach to this, where the product teams come to leadership and say, these are the things we want to execute against, these are the initiatives we want to do, and these are the resources we need to do that. And then every week there is a meeting to sort of ensure that our resourcing is aligned with those efforts. And it's tough because we have our digital media team is 50 people, which sort of sounds a lot, but now you realize that we support 5 major product lines plus a lot of internal tools. So.
All right, 2 questions. One, first, moving from what you like about your job, if I got to ask, what is the single most biggest challenge, the work what you do? And second thing is, are there any exciting products to watch out for in the next coming days, months?
Yeah, those are good questions. Okay, so I would say that the biggest pain point that I encounter is where to begin? No, it's not that. I would say that the biggest pain point that I have, and you would probably hear this from any product manager at any company, is resourcing. Is figuring out how to, when you have 2 things of equal importance, how to decide where you apply your resources, right? And it's different when you have to look at whether it's a product or a feature or anything that is a game changer and is going to sort of like revolutionize your industry or disrupt anything, right? There's those kind of things, but those are far and few between, right? That's like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,000,000 that you're going to be asking that question. Far more, 99% of the time, you're like, this thing would be useful this quarter, it will also be useful next quarter, and same with this thing. And so the hardest thing that I have is, one of the main products I work on has 1 front-end developer, and that's it. And so figuring out how to place him is very difficult. And I'm saying this and I'm realizing I am super fortunate that that's what I feel is my biggest pain point. Though I will say that the other one that I can think of is legacy technology, which I sort of alluded to earlier, which is I don't think I realized before I got into this job how many people use iPhones that are like 8 years old and have no intention of updating. So figuring out how you account for sort of the Luddites, people that will not update their devices because that's what they do. Getting them on a device in the first place was a hard thing. With people that are breaking edge, right? Like every company wants to be on the bleeding edge of something, and so figuring out the balance between those two is just is a constant tug of war. In terms of your second question, like emerging technologies, if you haven't checked out, if you are not familiar with machine learning, even though it is a behemoth, I think specifically the stuff that Google is pioneering with the application of machine learning, I think is amazing. And this year they at I/O, their main conference, they talk a lot about switching from a mobile-first company to essentially an AI-first company. And so I think that is probably the most exciting because machine learning is the thing that's behind this concept of artificial intelligence. And so the application of that in real-world scenarios, I think, is going to be amazing. Right? It's going to do everything from autonomous cars to send us to Mars, and those kind of things are we're living in sort of that day of tomorrow.